Welcome, everyone. We will just give people a second to join the webinar, and then we will get started in just a minute. Okay, it looks like we are hitting a critical mass, so we'll just get started with the introduction since we only have an hour and lots of material to cover. Welcome everyone to our session 2 of our Affordable Housing 101 webinar series. This session will cover the economics of affordable housing development, cost drivers, and long-term affordability. So you can kind of see it as a stepping stone from last week's session on Financing 101. Today's speakers will be Paul Biesmeyer and Sharon Bennett from the California Housing Partnership. And I am Danielle Edwards from SCAMP, the Senior Public Affairs Associate. Just want to plug that in. And this session will be recorded, and we will be sending out the slide deck and the recording later this afternoon to all the registrants, so don't worry if you don't catch everything. And lastly, we will have a Q&A session, so please put all Q&A questions in that Q&A box in your toolbar, and Paul and Sharon will address them towards the end of the session. And with that, I will let Paul and Sharon get started.
Great, thank you, Danielle. Welcome, everybody. I want to extend an appreciation to Danielle and the whole SCAMP team for not only inviting us to help with this series, but for, I think this is the third year that SCAMP has mounted this California Affordable Housing Leadership Institute, which I think is just, it's an important thing to do in our field, to provide a sort of nuts and bolts introduction to what is this thing you're talking about now? Is it public housing? Is it HUD? It's important we do this, and I'm very glad that Sharon and I and Chad and I last week can be part of it. Next slide, Sharon. So just a brief introduction to the California Housing Partnership. We are a nonprofit think and do tank founded by the state legislature in 1988. We are not an organ or an instrumentality of the state. However, the governor and the leaders in the legislature do appoint our board. When we were founded to do two things: to preserve existing affordable homes throughout the state that were in danger of losing their long-term affordability restrictions, and to help create to create additional affordable housing throughout the state for low-income Californians. And I keep saying the word California, and there's a reason for that. Our focus is solely on the state of California. We're not national. We're not the National Income Housing Coalition or anyone else who has a national footprint. We are laser focused on working on housing affordability issues here in our state. And that work takes a bunch of different forms. So Sharon and I are part of our financial consulting team, and we work with both nonprofit developers and local governments on affordable housing transactions, as well as policy and program design. We also have a whole team that works on applied research, and Sharon will touch on some of that applied research later as she's talking. We have a team that focuses on increasing the environmental sustainability of existing affordable housing and increasing the sustainability and climate resiliency of new affordable housing. And lastly, we have a team that spends a lot of time in the hallways of the legislature and working with regulatory agencies on both legislative and policy advocacy surrounding affordable housing issues. So that's who we are, but I'd like to pause for a minute and get a quick sense of who you are. And you'll see a poll pop up that Danielle just enabled. And just a couple quick questions. You're all, this is an anonymous black box to us on the delivery end. So there's 150, 200 people, and we would just love to know kind of who you are. And I'm chuckling on the side because I could see the names as people were being admitted to the Zoom room, and there are some names in there where I feel like if I had a way to unmute you, I'd love to invite you to come and do this with Sharon and me. But unfortunately, you just have to listen to us blather. So if you just click those radio buttons and roll on from there. Great, thank you, Danielle. Okay. So we're a pretty balanced crowd today. A lot of folks who work with government agencies, as well as a lot of affordable housing developers and owner operators. A few folks from the consultant class, some involved in policy or research, and other. So quite a different smattering of folks. Our installment last week was much more heavy on government agency staff. So anyway, welcome one and all. We'll try to keep it moving, and we'll try to keep it interesting. And our goal, as Danielle said at the top, will be to reserve time for Q&A at the end. We're going to try to reserve 15 minutes. Please remember, just want to hit this one more time. Please don't put questions in the chat. We're not monitoring the chat for questions. Please put it in the Q&A box down below. There will be some that we'll answer in real time as we go. There will be some that we'll probably hold until the end because they're interesting but deserve separate discussion. There will be some that we'll answer in writing as we talk here. So that's what Sharon and I will be monitoring as we cruise along. Next slide, please. So we thought a good place to start here would be to talk about what is the general model for affordable housing development? How do we approach it? What does it look like? I think it's axiomatic that people who've never touched or seen affordable housing before they have an image in mind, and they have a presumption of who in mind, or who and how. And I think the place most folks come from as well, it must be public housing. And in public housing is a form of affordable housing, but that's not the predominant way that affordable housing has been produced around the country, not just in California, for the last, oh gosh, 35, 40 years or more. And so we want to spend a little bit of time talking about what it looks like, different modalities, different typologies of affordable housing production. And but before I show you a few examples here, I want to talk about through lines for affordable housing anywhere. What are the irreducibles that makes affordable housing what it is? Next slide, please. So, top answer on the board is that in any form of affordable housing, the absolute number one defining feature is that rents will be permanently affordable and meaning that they offer significant advantage over market. What does that mean? Rents are going to be below market. And in general, they have to be at least somewhat below market, at least 10% below market rents or so. But I was just spot checking a few projects that we're working on last night, and on average, the rents on those developments targeted to families are 50% less than market, and in some cases even less than that. So we're talking about a genuine public benefit that's being provided in the form of lower rents. In addition, affordable housing, if you get a group of particularly nonprofit affordable housing developers in a room, one of the things that you will hear over and over is it's not just the building. So affordable housing generally is also providing, in addition to the roof over the head and the rents that are significantly below market, is typically providing supportive services tailored to the needs of the folks who are living in that building that both foster housing stability, prevent very low-income people from cycling out of a stable housing situation, and also leading to improved long-term outcomes. So we'll talk about that a little bit more later. Another thing that's fairly common in affordable housing is locations that may be different than the kind of location decisions that you would see market rate developers make. Often, affordable housing will be located in areas that offer very high opportunity, that is very good educational outcomes for elementary and high school students. Also, Sometimes we'll see affordable housing, we'll often see affordable housing located in underinvested areas for equally compelling policy reasons. And those different types of location decisions can result in greater inclusion and greater integration of low-income people into, say, higher income communities. And also, critically, over time, an opportunity to break generational cycles of poverty. And the last thing that I will say, this list could be longer. People could argue with it, they could reorder. But the last thing I want to put on here is that in general, affordable housing is high quality. It's environmentally sustainable, or at least bending the arc towards greater environmental sustainability, and it's well maintained. And that's what you'll see as a through line through any affordable housing. Next slide, please. Now let's get into a few examples. And before I talk about these, I want to give credit to my colleague, Leslie Hampton with National Core, National Community Renaissance, who these are all National Core's developments that we're going to be looking at. And she put together the proto version of this slide deck last year and delivered in, she was talking where I'm talking now. So I just want to be upfront. These are not things the California Housing Partnership developed. We don't own, we don't develop. These are all National Core's property, and a tip of the hat to them for their fine work and also for such a broad sort of geographic and population spread in the work that they do. But they're here because they are axiomatic of representatives of types of affordable housing. So the easiest one for us all to think of is new construction, which looks like other kinds of new construction. Funny, in this photo, you don't see a sign that says, this is affordable housing. And often, as I've taught my son over the years, you can tell affordable housing when you drive down the street because, one, it may have a name. A lot of market rate developments, some market rates developments don't have names. But number two, it probably looks better than the adjacent multifamily buildings or other multifamily buildings in the area. And this is a great example. This project is called Legacy Square. It's 93 units, which is sort of right there in the pocket for average size of new construction affordable housing developments, and it's targeted to large families. In addition to large families, about a third of those units are what's called PSH, that is permanent supportive housing. What that means is units that are set aside for people experiencing homelessness or people coming from homelessness. Okay, so this is not only a great example of new construction, but also emblematic of a sort of building targeting or population targeting that you often see and have seen in affordable housing increasingly over the last 10, 12 years as a result of policy decisions. That is, all right, we need to be also bringing people in off the street at the very lowest income levels or at the level of zero income. And perhaps we want to be integrating those folks with with other populations. Next slide, please. A lot of affordable housing is also done through rehabilitation, and that can be the acquisition of existing market rate properties, in which affordability covenants are laid via the financing. Affordability covenants are layered onto a property. The property is rehabilitated. The property is leased out to low-income families and individuals. It can, in addition to acquisition, it might also be preservation of existing affordable housing, because, shocker, you might build it. Let's say you build affordable housing. If we were looking at Legacy Court, the previous project, well, guess what? In 25 years, 30 years, something like that, it needs an infusion of capital. And the same low rents that provide benefit to those tenants are the same low rents that are not going to provide a giant mortgage that you need to replace your major building systems, which are going to need replacing after, say, 20, 25 years. But in any case, this particular National Core project, it's a great rehabilitation example. It's called Cathedral Palms. It's in Cathedral City. in Riverside County. 231 units. Very low density, obviously, all targeted to low-income seniors. And again, this is an example of funding policy driving population. So about a third-ish of those units are set aside as permanent supportive housing for seniors experiencing homelessness. And this was completed in 2023. Rehabilitation can look like all kinds of things. I just want folks to be aware that rehabilitating is an important way to preserve existing affordable housing and to bring existing market rate development into the affordable portfolio. Before we move on, there is one other type of acquisition rehab I just think bears mentioning here, especially folks who are in the policy or local government spaces, and that is NOAH, naturally occurring affordable housing. It's another strategy to take existing market rate housing, bring it into the affordable portfolio. And it generally doesn't involve the same kinds of capital sources and the same kinds of rehabilitation, sort of deep rehabilitation that you're seeing here in this example. But anyway, we could do a whole seminar on no. We're not doing that today, but at least I wanted to say the words. Next, please. And in the spirit of just giving you more examples, another type of affordable housing is inclusionary housing. So this is inclusionary is new construction. My brain wants to categorize things, and I realize our examples are not sort of in neat categorical columns, but if you wanted to, you could put this under new construction. But this example is here in the city of Los Angeles, which is where Sharon and I are headquartered in North Hollywood. And this development is 151 new construction units for low-income individuals and families. 151 units. So what's the inclusionary part? Well, what that means is that as a condition of a larger market rate development, that market rate developer was required, probably by Metro in this case, although I don't know the specifics myself. That developer was required to provide a certain number of affordable housing units. And inclusionary housing, and this is a very powerful tool for affordable housing creation, not only in infill urban locations like you're seeing here, but in larger residential subdivisions. We see it quite a bit. I've seen quite a bit of it over the years in parts of Orange County, in northern San Diego County, and so on. Last thing I want to say about inclusionary housing is that you'll see it happen in two ways. The inclusionary requirement is simply that the market rate developer cause 151 units to be affordable units to be constructed. Those units can be like within a larger market rate development, or they can be a standalone development. And the latter is what happened here. So CORE partnered up with the market rate developer, said, yeah, we will, in exchange for X, Y, and Z, we will build the 151 units that you're required to provide, and everybody wins that way. Next slide, please. Last example I want to give, and again, this is we're not following particularly hard categorical lines here, but I do want to acknowledge modular housing as a type of new construction that has been increasingly circulating in affordable housing policy spaces over the last several years, and we have been seeing more and more affordable housing built as modular. So this is one of National Corps' examples down in the desert. I forget which community it's in, but it's 74 units for low-income seniors completed about 10 years ago. So it's been a while. And so what is modular? Well, what it means in a case like this is that the vertical components, that is the units themselves, are built offsite in a factory and then trucked to the site. And then the site-specific work is foundations, pads, parking structure, site work, et cetera, and then exterior treatments. So the exterior can look any way you want it to. And the value proposition of modular housing is that you save money through time savings. In most cases, it's typically not a big, it's not, at least so far, we haven't, in California, we haven't seen it be a major source of cost saving on sticks and bricks, that is labor and materials. However, it can take significantly less time to build modularly than stick built, and so it can shorten your construction time, and therefore reduce the cost of carrying financing and so on. And lastly, modular is, in general, there's an opinion. I'm rendering an opinion here, but modular is generally most suited to smaller units. So, studios, one bedroom units for, say, seniors or individuals coming out of who experienced homelessness, that type of thing. Simply because these units, these modules, once they're built, they have to be trucked to the site. And so you're limited by, well, but you're limited both by the federal government and state governments to what you can truck, what you can truck both legally and economically. Next slide, please. And lastly, on this kind of in this broad theme of affordable housing examples, I want to poke a little bit more at the idea of the idea that affordable housing is more than just the building, that services are an incredibly important distinguishing factor for affordable housing. And they, what are they? Well, it depends. It depends what we're talking about. In a development targeted to families, it may be economic literacy, economic fluency. In a development targeted to people experiencing homelessness, you might be talking about intensive case management to make sure that someone is getting to medical appointments with the VA and those kinds of things. So the type of services really depend, but altogether, services are always designed to promote housing stability for low-income people. And services are, as as tenant incomes are lower and lower, the less money people have, the more important services typically are to maintaining housing stability over time. And in general, areas of service would typically focus on education outcomes for kids and teens, economic mobility over time, senior health and wellness, and also independence and stability. Next slide, please. So that's affordable housing writ large, and I want to drill a little further into the nonprofit affordable housing model and why it matters. Next slide, please. So nonprofits, I want to say out loud, I try to acknowledge and own my biases. So California Housing Partnership works, as I said at the top, works only with nonprofit affordable housing developers and public agencies, and that is part of our charter. That's our founding DNA, and that's that's what we were created to do. There are plenty of for-profit affordable housing developers out there, and I'm not besmirching anybody's who do a great job, and I'm not besmirching anybody's great work in producing and preserving affordable housing. But I am getting on my soapbox a little bit about the uniqueness of the nonprofit affordable housing development model, where number one, you have mission-driven priorities that are ingrained in the DNA of the builder and operator, where that organization exists solely to produce affordable housing for low-income people. Secondly, among nonprofit affordable housing developers, not only will the housing be permanently affordable, and that is, I need to acknowledge, that is largely guaranteed by long-term affordability covenants, but also with one thing that is fairly unique to nonprofit affordable housing developers is the focus on long-term stewardship. In general, nonprofit developers are not only are they not focused on short-term profits, they're not at the end of I'm just going to say at the end of 15 years, and there's a reason why that time increment is important, but let's just say at the end of 15 years, they will not be selling their property. They're building them and managing them for the long term, and that is part of their DNA for how they want to be um, not only provide this long-term public benefit, but be accountable to both the communities they operate in and to low-income people. And lastly, I would say this point applies to all affordable housing, but that we're making that the units become the affordable homes they're a public benefit. They're a public asset, a privately owned public asset that are made possible with financing through public subsidies.
Yeah. Paul, I'd also add something
Mhm.
that we see with nonprofits that we don't see with for-profits as often is an organization that was founded in a particular community, serving the needs of a particular community. Now, a lot of developers will build in a lot of different neighborhoods, but I think in California particularly, we see, you know, the Little Tokyo Service Center, the East Bay Asian Local Development Corporation, orgs that really can know the community of renters that they have in mind and listen to and respond to those community needs.
That's a great point, Sharon. Thank you. So we talked about some of the distinguishing attributes of this model, but well, why does it matter? Well, one is that our communities are served by all of the different development models we talked about up above, but being responsive to the needs of those communities, as Sharon highlighted, is particularly important and unique. It matters because affordable housing, as I said before, is a long-term public asset. So the public makes an upfront investment to build the thing, and that upfront investment provides lasting affordability. It gets complicated, but essentially in most cases, we're talking about forever affordability, de facto permanent affordability. And the last thing is we are never ever focused on flipping these developments for profit or short-term gains. I'll turn it over to you, Sharon.
Great, thanks. So Paul has given us a great introduction to the types of affordable housing that we'll see built in our communities. And we really, us and SCAMF and a whole lot of other people just constantly want to lift up the point that this affordable housing is essential infrastructure and it requires investment at scale across every community. Paul mentioned how, we can look at this both as infill development in underserved communities. We also need affordable housing in what are called high or highest resource areas, because everybody deserves to live close to their job, have access to great schools. So really our work is trying to build these investments across the state, whether it's rural or urban, coastal. We need to see it everywhere. And these investments, again, provide a long-term public benefit that are these homes, but are also a lot of other things. We see a lot of developments providing linkages to public transit, building new bike lanes or bus lanes. We see commercial space that is devoted to local nonprofits or local artists. And if you're preserving existing housing, doing those green retrofits, making it more physically and environmentally sustainable, these are public benefits that go beyond just providing the home. So now we've sort of talked about the universe of what we're doing. We want to take some time to talk about the cost of affordable housing, what goes into creating these homes, what is driving these costs, and ways that we might be able to innovate and think about these costs a bit more. So some of this will harken back to the material from last week, where Paul and Chad introduced the general economics of affordable housing. But in case you weren't there, so when we're talking about affordable housing, we mean housing that is affordable for people to rent. And it's typically targeted at a certain level of area median income, so typically between 30% and 80% of the area median income, For a little bit of context, 2025 LA counties, 60% area median income, so sort of middle of that range, for a household of two is just under $73,000. Right? So we'll see a range of rents depending on household size and income, anywhere from $500, $800 up to $3,000. And it's important to create this because there's just such a vast need for it. The California Housing Partnership puts out a housing needs report every year. And in our 2025 report, we reported that the median rent in California has increased 40% since 2000, while the median renter income has only increased 9%. So we see more and more families unable to afford their rent. And extremely low income renter households, so about 79% of them pay more than half of their income on housing costs. So we are creating this to serve those folks. And as a result, when you have these low rents coming in as the income of a property, what happens is you have a low net operating income. And then that property can only support so much of a conventional mortgage, conventional debt. You can think of conventional debt on a multifamily building the same way as you could think of a personal mortgage. You can only support as much of a mortgage on a house as your income will allow you. And so with these properties, since there is a smaller conventional debt, smaller mortgage, the rest of the building has to be financed through other means. And that means there needs to be more public subsidy. So to compare the makeup of financing for market rate developments as opposed to affordable developments, and you can think of these bar charts as, what funding sources do we need in order to pay for all of the costs associated with developing that property? So that's the land, that's the sticks and bricks cost of building, it's paying your architect, it's paying interest on your construction loan, it's paying your lawyers, it's paying for all of your engineering work and furnishing if you're providing furnishings for those permanent supportive housing units. So all of those costs need to be paid for somehow. And when you're doing a market rate development, the funding stack typically looks like a combination of conventional debt, and here it's a sizable chunk because there are market rate rents supporting a larger mortgage, and then equity, and that investor equity, they expect to achieve a certain return over time. And if a market rate developer is looking at something and they can't pencil it out to be able to pay the debt service on that mortgage and pay the investor the return that they're expecting, it won't be built. On the affordable side, so here we have that smaller conventional mortgage. We have a chunk of equity from the low-income housing tax credit program is a lot of what Paul and I and our partners work on here, and we'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide. And after that, that debt and equity piece, there's a big gap that you need soft sources, public sources to fill that gap. And that is a combination of local city funds, county funds, statewide funds, perhaps there's federal funding. We'll pop a list up in a second here. And these soft sources, there isn't just one, usually multiple sources. So for affordable housing, building up this full capital stack, it used to be back in the first affordable housing in the 1960s under the HUD 202 program, it was just one source, just HUD gave you the money, and there it was. And then as different programs started in the 1970s and 80s, we would see like a conventional mortgage paired with a soft source. The low-income housing tax credit program was born in 1986. And so now we have that as a resource, but we need additional public sources to fill that gap. And now we're seeing, at least 3 or 4, usually more sources needed. This chart is from the partnership's LA County 2025 report, and it lists out the number of funding sources for each low-income housing tax credit development from 2012 through 2024. And as you can see, plurality of folks are in the 4 to 7 source range. And so to just talk a little bit about the low-income housing tax credit, again, that's a federal program where the tax credits are allocated from the IRS. Those credits are sold to investors so they can claim the tax credits and other tax losses associated with real estate in this country. So they become part of the ownership entity and get that stream of tax credits and losses for a period of time. And the money they pay for that tax credit equity has become a major source of funding for affordable housing. So as we are working and Paul and I help our clients stack together these 4 to 8 different sources. Oh, sorry, let me go back here. This is the world of what we are looking at, right? So like I said, this is local and state and some federal sources. And one thing to keep in mind is these sources, they're all competitive. And their policy goals are ever shifting. So often an affordable developer's focus is shifting in order to match what they are doing to what the policy goals are of the funding sources out there, and to be well situated and to be in a competitive position to be able to get these funds, because the demand for these funds far outstrips the supply. And so the process of pulling together all of these funding sources, it's time intensive and resource intensive. All these funding sources, it's not just an open window where you can get it. They're available once a year or a few times a year if we're talking about state tax credit and bond resources. Maybe once every other year, depending on the budgeting cycle of the various entities. And for each of these funding sources, the partnership did an analysis earlier this year, and we found that with each additional state funding entity involved, it adds almost $18,000 per unit to development costs. So if you're talking about going to 2 to 3 state entities, that's $50,000 per home that we're adding on to the costs. And the reason why it adds cost, partially a lot of it is just because of time. So every month that you are holding on to a property, most properties, if they're acquired, they have an acquisition loan. They have a pre-development loan to fund the pre-development expenses, like paying your architect for those plans, doing the market study and appraisals and environmental reports, going through entitlements processes. All of this costs money, and the longer it takes, you have more holding costs and are spending more money to put this together just to get to the point where you have your capital stack all assembled. And despite all of this, what we find is that on a per unit basis, affordable housing costs about the same to build as private residential construction. So, and this has been looked at a lot. In 2014, there was a state housing agency cost study. In 2020, the Turner Center did a big report on this. In 2024, California Housing Partnership looked into this. So in our recent report, we're finding that for LA County, the median affordable per unit cost is about $730,000. And these costs have increased quite a bit in the past 10, 15, 20 years. And that's part of that is because it's expensive to build in California across the board, whether you're an affordable developer or a market rate developer. both land, building materials. It's all expensive. The California Construction Cost Index, that has increased by 9% annually from 2021 to 2023. And where you might find a difference here is on a per square foot basis, affordable housing can tend to be more expensive. And part of that is because we have smaller units. So there's more square footage devoted to the expensive stuff like bathrooms and kitchens. There's also, and we see the smaller unit sizes in general because it's affordable housing, and the smaller unit sizes, particularly in the recent drive towards more permanent supportive housing and special needs housing. So those tend to be studios or one bedrooms as opposed to larger family units. And those developments also have that more robust community and service space provision. They need larger operating reserves. So all of that sort of builds up the costs. And let me see here. So I'll talk about some of these and hand it off to Paul, and we'll talk about these costs in general. So I've talked about the cost impacts of the capital stacking. We also see with affordable housing a lot of scale limitations, and this comes across in a few ways. So affordable housing, you can't always build at the scale that is often seen in market rate developments. Part of that is due to political feasibility of housing a large number of low-income people in one place. But more often we see it as there are resource constraints. So all these public funding sources, they have programmatic caps, whether it's it will only provide a certain amount of money per unit or a certain amount of money per development. So if a state resource is going to be capped out at $20 million, as a developer, when you're working out your feasibility, you're not going to be proposing a $90 million development because you can't stack up enough resources to get to that. So as a result, you build a smaller building than perhaps could be held on that land. Yeah, Paul, do you want to take over from here? Oh, I lost you.
Throat. I want to go back to capital stacking for a minute because I'm going to get ahead of myself. Okay, I'll keep rolling. So Sharon talked about scale limitations. Other things that drive costs in affordable housing developments sometimes that can result in cost being what looks like anomalously higher are site conditions. I talked way at the beginning about the nonprofit model and how sometimes we'll see nonprofit affordable housing development happening in places where you might not see it otherwise. That can include on pieces of land where someone else might not choose to build. You may have a piece of land that's a high priority for local government to redevelop. Well, cool. That land might have environmental contamination issues, maybe soil contamination or groundwater contamination. It may be, maybe it's a site with, it's a priority for local government because it's a site with historic significance. I just went to a grand opening last week of a project that it's beautiful. I can't commend the city more highly for this. However, on a per unit, per home basis, a per door basis, it was fairly expensive. And part of that is that we had an existing historic building that was very important to the city to preserve. So site conditions can add cost. Maybe the through line is that affordable housing sometimes, but not always, is only sometimes making its way to the most economically efficient sites. Sometimes there are other policy reasons stacked onto site selection that don't have to do with pure economic efficiency. If you want to build the most economically efficient thing, we're going to go out to the exurbs and we're going to build low density garden apartments all day long. And that's what we're going to do. But that means we're not coming back and doing urban infill at all. Design can also add costs. And you might ask, well, Okay, fine. But why? Every multifamily building built anywhere is going to have an architect behind it. Fact of the matter is, sometimes affordable housing um, has to provide a little bit more. It's held to a little bit higher standard. Why? Well, community acceptance, political feasibility is an important factor there. Sometimes additional design requirements are also imposed simply because a developer is going to local government, to the county board of supervisors, or to a city council for funding. And in exchange for that funding, well, golly gee, the board of soups and the council members are also choosing to have a say in how the thing looks. And the more ornaments you hang on the Christmas tree, my analogy isn't great here, but I'm going to continue. The more ornaments you hang on the tree, the more expensive the tree is. You see where I'm going. Development fees can also add costs. If you looked at most market rate developments, you wouldn't see the only way that affordable housing developers get compensated is through something called the developer fee. That is a fee that goes to them that's built into the budget that compensates them for the time and the risk they take to build. And that's how they keep their doors open and the lights on. In most, not all, but most comparable market rate developments, you don't see those development fees. And also we tend to have our financing is more complicated. And so there are just more costs that are associated with that financing. But there are other things as well. There may be additional policy goals that are driving costs. There may be local living wage ordinances. There may be energy efficiency sustainability requirements. There may be additional accessibility requirements. There may be, again, as a result of going to a city council and asking for funding, and they may say, well, we want you to do all these additional things like put in a new left turn lane. Well, gosh, that's a really expensive thing to do. So we tend to see more policy goals layered onto affordable housing developments that perhaps another development might not, at least an infill development, might not have to bear. And I don't have a bias for or against. Those are just policy choices. I wouldn't argue that additional accessibility is a bad thing. It sure as heck isn't, but it's going to be a cost driver. And the last thing is additional amenities for residents and the community will also add cost to the extent that a child care center is required to be provided, et cetera. This is going to make it cost a little bit more. Next slide, please. So where we're going to end today, and then we'll take we'll take all the questions you want to put in the Q&A is, well, gosh, so how do we? Sharon said that on a per unit basis, affordable housing is at rough parity with market. On a per square foot basis, it may be a little bit more expensive because of some of the things we looked at. And in general, I don't want to stand up here and be the apologist for high cost. The cheaper we can build affordable housing without sacrificing long-term durability and sustainability, the farther public resources stretch and the more affordable housing can be built. It's just simple math. So that's something we should all want to see. And so the questions are, the question is then, how do we bend the cost curve? And that is a hard thing to do, I gotta say, because affordable housing developers are building in the same materials environment and in a lot of cases, a more constrained labor environment than market rate developers. So how do we do it? Well, streamlining the process of entitlements and funding award will save money. It will save money by saving time, and by saving time to redesign and carry the land and so on, as Sharon said before. So speedier land use approvals and speedier funding awards will make a difference in costs. And there's something that the partnership has been talking about for a while, and there's been a conversation happening about this at the state level among policymakers, which is, well, gee, at the state level, what about a one-stop shop? Maybe if you're trying to build affordable housing, you shouldn't have to go shopping to state HCD and then I'm going to use acronyms and not introduce them because we don't have time, but maybe I shouldn't have to go to state HCD and then go to TCAC or CIDLAC and maybe even to Cal HFA. That's a lot of different doors to go to. And each of those doors involves time and therefore costs more money. Land and partnerships with local governments and community land trusts can also be a way of lowering costs. That is, if local government has a piece of land, or state or county government has a piece of land that is appropriate on which to to site affordable housing and doesn't come with huge environmental contamination issues or ancient infrastructure that's going to cost a fortune, bringing that land forward to use for affordable housing on at a either at a nominal cost that's going to save money right out the door. So if my city makes land that is worth $50,000 to $75,000 per unit available to me for $0 or for nominal rent over time, that's real cost savings. That makes a difference. Construction methods can also bend the cost curve. We need to. I used to be a developer a long time ago, and I still like to think I'm a construction guy somewhere way in the back of my head. But I think we need to keep making runs at modular housing, like we looked at the top, at panelized construction, and also just doing more of that in California. A lot of that modular right now gets trucked in from other states, which adds quite a bit to cost. And then we need to be honest. Those are, it ain't rocket science. They're just things those are just sort of the lunch bucket basics of how we might be able to to bring down affordable housing development costs. And lastly, we should at least be eyes wide open about policy goals that get layered onto affordable housing that may well add costs. So additional sustainability measures beyond Title 24, those add costs. And I personally think we should be doing them, but they do add cost. Density. Boy, density can cut both ways. I've seen examples in very pro-affordable housing jurisdictions where they want to see extreme max density on a site. And I realize that doesn't happen everywhere, but I've seen it happen a couple of times. And that extreme maximum density is great from a policy outcome point of view. It's maximum use of, say, a government-owned piece of land. But boy, it may push you into a construction type. Maybe it's pushing you up 7 stories and you're having to go steel. And now it's pushing you into construction type that's much more expensive on both a per square foot and per unit basis. But density can cut the other way as well. Maybe, sort of as Sharon alluded to earlier, you're working on a site where you could economically do more affordable homes, but the support just isn't there. Or maybe the money's not there. But often it's political support to maximize density. In which case your 50 to, your land cost is amortized over fewer units. All of your fixed costs are amortized over fewer units. Commercial space is another that adds cost. Often we'll see requests for proposals for publicly owned land come with a requirement as part of a sort of, I don't know, new urbanist, good urban planning practice to have ground floor commercial. Well, the ugly truth is that doesn't pay for itself. It's a completely different financing model, and 5,000 square feet of little ground floor commercial storefronts do not pay for themselves. And so they are a long-term drag, or they can be they are a short-term drag on the capital required. They add cost. And they can be a long-term drag on the operation of the property. So there's lots of affordable housing out there with empty commercial space. There are affordable housing developments that have vibrant, perfect commercial space, operating beautifully because it's site and context appropriate. And lastly, parking. Sometimes we see parking requirements layered onto affordable housing that don't really have to do with the amount of car ownership that we typically see among low-income populations. And the more structured parking you're going to do at $40,000 to $60,000 per space, the more it's going to cost. So those are the thoughts I wanted to leave you with on bending the cost curve. And now we'd like to take your questions. in the.
Yeah, we have a couple here. So I'd like to start with someone's curious about why bending the cost curve is mainly focused on how to drive costs down instead of or in conjunction with increasing available funding to meet costs. And I'll say, yes, we have not talked a lot about how the availability of funding is inadequate for the demand. And we absolutely need to have more funding sources available for affordable housing. There was a recent statewide funding application, and their general line multifamily housing production funding source was oversubscribed 9-1. And so we, us and SCAMF are a lot of our advocacy work is around creating new funding sources, increasing the capacity of the funding sources that already exist. And that's a particularly tough thing right now when we have local budget deficits, state budget deficits, and everything that's going on with the federal government. So, but decreasing our costs can do part of the work. Can't get all the way there unless we get more funding available for these resources, for sure.
I'll just add, Sharon, that if the fact of the matter is, if whether or not affordable housing costs less, the same as, or more than market rate housing, it matters, but what matters most is that we're going in front of local, city, county, and state government, showing all of our cards. We're letting people in. We're showing them how the sausage is made and saying, this is what it's going to cost. And we need to be both, we need to walk the walk and talk the talk. We need to act and we need to say and do that we are being good stewards of public resources. And part of that is using them as efficiently as we can. And that means trying to look for ways to keep a lid on cost growth to the extent we can do it.
There's another one. It seems that more and more nonprofit developers are chasing the funding, causing a shift in the mission. Do you have any advice on how to continue to be competitive without chasing the funding? This one's tough. I think I'd say to a certain extent, you sometimes cannot. Sometimes you don't have much of a choice, right? The LA Triple H dollars, those were specifically targeted at 50% permanent supportive housing, 50% general affordable. And if you wanted to make something in the city of LA with that funding source, that's what you had to do. I think after years of the, very focused on special needs, very focused on PSH production, there is more awareness in the development community and in the public policy community that perhaps we need a few more resources available to more general populations. And part of streamlining would also include simplifying the number of resources so there aren't as many specialized sources to go after each typical type. So hopefully the policy environment will shift to meet developers where they're at a little bit. But I think some form of targeting is going to be inevitable. And as long as you're doing it in a way that still serves your community, if your mission is about providing affordable housing, I think you can try to make that happen with what is available. Let's see. Okay, I'll go to this one. A little confused about the development fee cost driver. Does this refer to development fees paid to local governments, for example, or does it refer to the developer fees nonprofit builders need to budget for in their projects? The answer is both. So local development impact fees are a factor in building any sort of housing, whether it's market rate or affordable in California, and certain jurisdictions have very high local development impact fees. Some jurisdictions offer waivers for affordable housing or for particular types of housing, so those costs will be decreased a little bit. But I think in the slide in particular, we were talking about the developer fee paid to developers of housing, because that is a line item in these budgets that exists to keep the lights on and keep these affordable, these nonprofits keep doing their work. That isn't something that you would find in a market rate budget, because the market rate developer, they are getting the return on their equity investment over time and not having an upfront fee really associated with it.
And I'll add on the talking about development fees, development impact fees. So, sewer district, water district fees, those kinds of things. Those are things that all the market rate developers are paying as well. But they add a lot of cost. And there's always, this is just where this is where there's a lot of zero-sum games in public policy. There are only so many resources, and we have all these goals, and we have to make choices. And there's been lots of advocacy over the years for both locally and at the state level for relief on development impact fees for affordable housing. Which, I, as an affordable housing partisan, I fully support. But on the other end of that, you've got a local small sewer district, or a local small, like in Ventura County, a small water district, and you're putting 150 unit affordable housing development online. That's a big impact to them. And so their position is, well, okay, but it doesn't change the impact of all of those 150 new homes coming online on my infrastructure or my services. So I just want to acknowledge it on the impact fees question. We're talking about real trade-offs between two different, an infrastructure goal, an infrastructure need, and the need to keep affordable housing as affordable as cheap to develop as we can.
I want to acknowledge we are at time, but we will stick around and answer questions for a few more minutes. But did want to say, for those of you who have to drop, thank you for joining us, and check out the rest of Scamp's series for sure. But to get through a bit more of the Q&A here, and thank you for your questions. So one is, West LA Sawtell area is a high opportunity area where affordable housing is being built. This housing tends to be smaller units or collaborative housing that is not oriented towards families. Doesn't this defeat the purpose of locating affordable housing in high opportunity areas? And I'll say yes, all of the studies on affirmatively furthering fair housing and high opportunities areas does point that the biggest benefit is to large family properties and children who can benefit from growing up in these areas. And that's why most of the funding and scoring incentives that various agencies have threaded into the funding competitions is targeted solely to large family developments or special needs developments in these areas. And what you might be seeing in some of that West LA, perhaps it's like ED1, smaller units popping up near transit. But I'd say it doesn't fully defeat the purpose of building in high opportunity areas. I think anyone can benefit from that. It's really just, in the research, it's really shown to be more towards the large family. And that is something that that funding agencies are aware of and cognizant of in designing the competitive metrics. Let's see. For those of us new in the affordable housing space, are there other trainings that you would recommend, or any certifications that can help us understand and navigate the fabric of regs, localized requirements to support our nonprofits' decision-making processes and to advocate more effectively? Well, I'll say continue to stick around for the SCAMP series. I know they have more going on, and they have stuff going on every year. I'll also do a quick plug for we do run some affordable housing webinars, and they'll be back this fall. If you want to do a deeper dive into tax credits and bonds and that level of work. Local conferences are a great place to learn things. Paul, you probably have more ideas too.
Yeah, I was going to say, get yourself to the SCAMP conference. It's coming up in September, something. Happens every year. It'll be at the Pasadena Convention Center, but the conference is it's a really good way to with, a relatively low price for relatively low barrier to entry, to get yourself in front of a lot of different subject matter experts, and to learn about any flavor of the policy issues in affordable housing that you're interested in. It could be homelessness issues, it could be financing issues, it could be development, design, entitlement, that kind of stuff. The SCAMP conference, also the Housing California conference, which will happen early next year, is also a great place to go and learn. And that's probably where we need to stop. We're at 12:35. I apologize we couldn't get to all the questions, but we did our best. And now let's turn it back over to Danielle.
Thank you, Sharon and Paul. That was great. And yes, as Sharon mentioned, we will be hosting another training, the third in our series, next Tuesday, so in 1 week from 11 to 12, and that will cover project feasibility analysis, so how developers assess land use potential for development and specifically for affordable housing development. But as I mentioned, I will be sending out an email later this afternoon with the slide deck and today's recording. And just a big thank you for Sharon and Paul and Chad last week and all of California Housing Partnership for their great partnership with SCAMF and the continued good work that they do. Hope to see you guys all next week. Bye.
Thanks. I'll take care.